When I first started playing tennis about 40 years ago in the early 80s, the only strings available to me were nylon-based strings, such as synthetic gut or multi-filament strings. They were okay, but you just could not get the same amount of spin and control as you can get on today's modern polyester strings. Whenever the mains moved against the crosses, it created so much friction that there was virtually no snap back. Meaning whenever you hit the ball, the strings moved and they never returned back to their original position. I remember watching Ivan Lendl meticulously straighten his strings after every point. Your string bed quickly developed an uneven consistency filled with big and small spaces between the strings. If the ball hit a big gap where there are very few strings, it flew a lot. But if it hit a place where there are many strings, densely packed together, the ball flew very little. Moving strings creating high friction not only reduces snapback, topspin, and creates an uneven string bed, but it also creates a lot of heat. And this heat melts the string, causing grooves, causing notching, shortening the life of the string. It was not uncommon to break your string after a few hours of play. Restringing was very common, often expensive, and a hassle. Then eventually, polyester strings started to take over the market. I am using this racket strung with the Babolat RPM Blast as an example for the typical poly string on the market today. Compared to traditional nylon-based strings, the snapback was much better and faster. Players like Gustavo Kuerten took advantage of this to create unprecedented spin and angles that was not possible before. Better snapback made it a little bit less likely for your string bed to become uneven. However, it still was possible to have little gaps in your string bed of big and small spaces, such as I've done here. Not as big as nylon, but still a little bit noticeable. This does slightly reduce your topspin, and small and big space string bed inconsistencies are still possible. The lack of friction that increases snapback also reduces heat when the strings move against each other. Now you can play much longer before grooves or notching becomes noticeable. Players that used to break nylon strings after only a few hours now would take several days before they need a new string job. L-Tec strings, such as the Paradox 1.23mm, uses a new technique to make polyester strings that slide against each other with virtually no friction. Do not confuse this with a string using a coating. The L-Tec strings use no coating. It is the string's natural texture that allows the fastest instantaneous snapback ever. This slingshots the ball with excessive spin that has never been possible before. I try my best to create uneven spacing between the mains by pulling them apart, and find it is much more difficult than any other poly string I have ever tested. The Paradox is relatively stiff with only 2% elasticity. But the softer, more elastic Celeste 1.20 with 4% elasticity has the same results when I do the same test. Look at the snapback, just as fast and instantaneous. L-Tec strings are designed to perform very soft like a multi-filament string on touch shots. But when you put weight on the ball, the molecular structure suddenly increases the stiffness of the string bed, making them play with a lot more control, just like any hard poly string on the market. To achieve this balance of comfort and control, it is imperative to string 4 to 5 pounds lower than traditional poly strings. L-Tec stands for Low Tension Energy Control. I have found a range from 36 to 44 pounds is good. However, I tend to keep my tensions closer towards the lower end, between 36 to 40. The strings have very little friction when they slide against each other, meaning it creates very little heat. And because there's very little heat, it creates virtually no notching. Your string job will now last 4 times longer than traditional poly strings. A hard-hitting player that would break his poly string job after several days will now be able to play for several weeks without restringing. But when you mix other strings with L-Tec in hybrids, the difference in textures of the strings will create unnecessary friction, and L-Tec strings will break faster and not play as well as they are intended. I do not recommend hybrids with L-Tec. I finished this video with this picture of what happens when a ball is hit outside of the swing spot on these L-Tec strings. Because the coefficient of the friction between the ball and the strings is so much higher than the coefficient of the friction between the strings on the strings, even when you hit the ball off center, the strings just clump up behind the ball to create a sweet spot where it should not have been. This makes playing tennis so much easier for so many people, for so many different levels. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and offer any constructive criticism or comments in the comment section. And I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.